Hi everyone, welcome back. We're now going to add controls onto our arms. So we're going to run some IK, and we're also going to create a few control handles. So let's start off with the control handles. I'm going to come up to Create, NURBS Primitives, Circle, and I'm just going to draw a little circle on the grid. It doesn't have to be too big. Something like that's probably going to be okay. And what I need to do is use my point snap, and I'm going to move this first handle up to the wrist joint, just here, like this. Okay, then what I'm going to do is duplicate this and move the duplicate to the elbow, and then duplicate it again and move this one to the shoulder, like this. Okay, so coming back to the wrist control, I'm going to turn off point snap for a second, okay, just in case it starts to interfere with the tools. And what I want to do is rotate this one 90 degrees on the Z axis. So I'm going to switch over to my channel box and type in rotate Z 90, like that. And this is going to create a handle which we can use to position the hand and also rotate the wrist. Okay, so over here, on the elbow control, I'm going to rotate this one 90 degrees in the X-axis so that it's upright, like this. And then what I'm going to do is move this backwards. And then I can also scale this down. I want this to be a bit smaller than the wrist control. And it needs to be sort of moved out here somewhere, like this. And then finally, with the shoulder control, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move or I'm going to rotate first. I'm going to rotate this one on the Z axis as well, 90 degrees, and I'm going to move it up and then just outwards a little bit. And the reason for this is that I know that the side of the can sits sort of level with this shoulder joint, and I want this to be outside of the can. Okay, now with this one I'm actually going to change the shape of it a bit. So I'm going to scale it down a little bit, like this, and then I'm just going to right click and hold on the curve, select control vertex, and then I'm just going to change the shape of this a little bit. So what I want to do is sort of maybe bring these up a little bit, maybe, you know, scale these ones out slightly, and then grab these ones and just move them down a bit, maybe scale them a bit like that. Okay, something like that. Okay, and this is sort of going to be like a shoulder control, which allows us to kind of position this joint if we need to. Okay, right. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is name these, and then what I'm going to do is duplicate them and move them across to this side of the rig. So this first one is going to be let's call this one LFT, left shoulder control. Okay, this one's going to be left elbow control, and this one here is going to be left wrist control. There we go. Okay. Now, before I do any freeze transformations or anything on these, I'm going to duplicate them and move them across, okay? So you can see here we've still got all of the XYZ position information. So I'm going to select the wrist, okay? I'm going to duplicate it, and then I'm going to change the translate X to a negative value by typing in a minus sign and hitting enter. And that's going to move this across to this side, and it should be positioned exactly on the wrist over there. If everything's been done accurately. So I just do the same thing for these other ones. So duplicate on the elbow control, change the X value to a negative, and so now I've got my three controllers. Okay, once I've done that, what I can do is freeze the transformations on all of them. So I can actually select all of them at once, and then go to modify freeze transformations, and I can also go edit delete by type history, just to make sure there's no input history. And now what I need to do is change the names of these ones to be right controls. So I'll grab the shoulder, I'm going to change this to a right and get rid of the 1, and then the elbow, change that to right, and then the wrist. There we go. And these ones here should already be okay, so we'll just double check those. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is change the pivot point of this controller, and I'm going to move it and snap it down to the shoulder. So currently its pivot point is sort of here. I'm going to switch on snap to points, and in my tool settings I'm going to turn on edit pivot, or hit the D key on the keyboard and just drag that down onto that position there. I'm also going to do the same thing with the right hand side. This one's going to get dragged down to that shoulder. Make sure you're dragging it to the shoulder and not to the collar. Has to be the shoulder. Okay, there we go. Switch off snap to point, switch off edit pivot. Now I'm going to save this file, so I'm going to go to File, Save Scene As, and I'm just going to change the name here. I'm going to change this to 5 and change this to ARM, so I know that this is where I'm doing the Arm IK. Okay, there we go. All right, so now what we want to do is we want to connect up our inverse kinematics. Okay, once we've done that, we can connect up some of the control handles, and also we need to add in an expression for this joint here. Okay, so let's start with the IK. We'll start with the easiest stuff first. So IK handle, just here. Let's double click that to open the settings. What we want to do here is just press reset. Okay, for this option, I do not want sticky active. This can cause problems with this next function working. So rotate plane, solver, and sticky off. What we're going to do is click on the shoulder, and then we're going to click on the forearm for this IK. Now the reason that we're doing the forearm and not the wrist is that if we click directly on the wrist, the IK is going to think that this arm has 2 elbows. It's going to treat the elbow joint as an elbow, but also the forearm as an elbow, and so the arm would also bend here, which we don't want. All right, so we have to click on the forearm. Okay, so now what we need to do, we are going to do the same thing over on the other side, but what we need to do is find the effector for this IK, and it'll be connected in underneath the collar joint. So if we come up here, I've already got this expanded out, but if you have a look under your root joint and follow the spine down, then you should see your collar joints just here, because they're connected onto the body. Okay, so these collar joints here, I've got collar left. I'm going to expand that out, and if I go down to the bottom of that, so there's the arms, shoulders, all the finger joints, right down the bottom you'll see this effector. Okay, it'll be grayed out because it's invisible, or it's hidden, but if you follow the line for the effector back up, it should go back up to where the forearm joint is, and there it is there. So there's forearm. So I know that this is the effector. What I'm going to do is change the pivot point position of this effector. At the moment, it's going to be where the IK handle is on the forearm joint. What I need to do is snap it to the wrist. So let me just zoom in here. So there's the effector. Currently with the move tool switched on, I can see it's on the forearm. I need to change the pivot point down to the wrist. So what we're going to do is switch on snap to pivot. We're going to turn on edit pivot in the move tool settings, and then we're going to drag this down to here, like this, and then just turn off edit pivot and turn off snap to points. Okay, so what this is going to do is kind of trick the IK into having its position here for its move, rotate, scale, even though it actually is, technically speaking, just here. All right, so we're going to get the full benefit of having a shoulder to wrist IK system or function, even though the IK really only goes to here. And that way it prevents us, we can have the handle here, but it prevents us having the 2 elbows. So we're going to repeat that over the other side, but before I do that, I'm going to rename this effector. So I'm going to call this left wrist EFF, short for effector. Okay. Then what I can do is fold the left joint, the left collar joint back up for the time being, and I'm going to be looking at the right collar joint in a second. So let's do the same thing over the other side. So we're going to grab the IK handle tool. We've still got the same settings, rotate plane and sticky off. Click on the shoulder, click on the forearm. Okay, now come into the collar right joint, expand that out, and look for the effector. There it is there. And we're going to turn on snap to points in the move tool setting. So move tool over here. We're going to edit pivot and snap this to the wrist. Then turn off, edit pivot, turn off snap to points. And then we're going to rename this effector and we're going to call this right wrist effector, EFF. And then what I might do is just fold that down as well, just to get it out of the way. Okay. So now what we want to do is make some connections here. Now, with the wrists, I need the wrist to be able to, or this wrist control, I need this to be able to move the IK handle around so we can position the arm, but I also need it to control the rotation of this wrist joint so that when I rotate the wrist control, the hand rotates with the controller. Okay, so what we're going to be doing is using constraints for this. So let's start off. I'm just going to save. So what I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to select the controlling object, the master object, and then I'm going to select the slave object, the object that's going to get controlled, which in this case is going to be the IK handle. We're going to make that connection first. Okay. So first the handle, then the or the control, and then the IK. I'm going to come up to constrain, and I'm going to use the point constraint system just here. So I'm going to open the options. I'm going to constrain all axes, and I'm going to maintain the offset. And I'm going to add that. Okay. So now, if I select that handle and I move it, you can see that the arm joints will move with it. Okay. Don't forget, when I do a test move and then I release the mouse, I then hit undo in order to reposition the object. Okay, or reset it. So now what I want to do is I want to select the control handle. I'm going to shift select the wrist joint just here, and I'm going to come back up to constrain, and this time what I'm going to do is use an orient constraint. So I'm going to go into the options, and I'm going to select maintain offset and constrain axes to all, just there, and then hit add. So now when I select the wrist control, if I use the move tool, I can move the arm like this, and if I rotate it, I can rotate the wrist and angle the hand whichever way I want. Okay, now I'm going to come back to the wrist control in a minute, because what I want to do is add in an expression to control the twisting of this joint. But I'm going to do the other controls first. Okay. So I'm going to do a pole constraint, or a pole vector constraint on the IK handle and the elbow control. So I'm going to select the elbow control. I'm going to shift select the IK handle like that. And then I'm going to come up to constrain, pole vector. Okay. So what this does is you can see now a line goes from the shoulder where the IK starts to the control handle, the elbow control. So what this does is, let's say if I move the arm here, if I select this handle and I move it up and down, you can see I can now change the angle that the elbow is pointing at. So if I want the elbow to be down like this, I can move this control handle down. So I'm just undoing to get back to where I was. Now I will be connecting this handle later on, probably to the wrist control. There are different ways of doing this. I'm going to do it in a very, very basic way. so that it's easy for you guys to kind of see the basic function. But normally we would use a whole range of different constraint connections and so on to get this to connect in and kind of always remain in a position where we can get to it. We're not going to worry too much about that. Okay, so the final connection is going to be the shoulder. So what we're going to be doing is using an orient constraint for this joint just here onto this handle. Okay, so with the shoulder control, what we're going to do is use an aim constraint for the collar joint, and it's going to make the collar joint point at this pivot here. Okay, so what we do, select the shoulder control, shift select the collar joint just there, and then come up to constrain, aim, options, and what we want to do is maintain offset. We are going to set the world up type to none, and we're going to constrain all axes. Okay, and then we just hit add. So what that does is when I select this handle and I move the handle, it's going to cause this joint to rotate, which then causes this shoulder joint to move. Okay, but it means that this joint is always going to aim at this shoulder joint here. Okay. So what this does, it's probably rare that we'd need to use this, but it's just if we need to kind of position the shoulder in a way that gives us a slightly better pose, we can use this handle to do that. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So I'll do this one first. So right shoulder control, right collar, constrain, aim. Just double check the settings, they're all still the same, hit add, and then just use the move tool and just move that just to make sure that that's working. That is working. Okay. Now let's see. We've done the effector for that one as well. So what we need to do is set up a wrist control, shift select the IK, like that, and we're going to go to constrain, point constraint. Once again, we've already got the settings, so I should be able to just hit that without any issues. Okay, and then I'm going to select the wrist control and shift select the wrist joint and go to constrain, orient constraint, like that. So that should give us rotation on the wrist. Yep, and it should give us position on the wrist, which it does. And now what we need to do is elbow control, shift select the IK handle and go to constrain pole vector. So now when we grab the elbow control, we can adjust the elbow angle. There we go. So those are our main controls for our arms. Now technically speaking, you could just select the joints in the fingers to pose them, to rotate them, and I think what we might do for this is just leave them like that. We're only going for a pretty basic rig here, just something pretty quick. Okay, so I'm just going to save that. Okay, so the final part for setting the arms up is getting this rotation control for this forearm joint. Basically what we need is when we rotate the character's wrist like this along the x-axis, we want this forearm joint to only rotate half as much, and that's so the forearm model doesn't completely twist and kind of end up sort of losing all of its volume. Okay, so what we're going to do is set up that expression. So first thing we're going to do is come up to the Windows menu, then down to animation. Actually, we need, let's have a quick look here. I always miss this bit. They've moved it in this version. What we're looking for is the expression editor. Whoops, it's normally under there. Oh, there it is there. Yeah, right down the bottom. Animation editors, expression editor. There we go. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, basically what I want to do is I want to have the rotation, the X rotation. So if I turn on the move tool, the rotate tool, this red handle here, what I want is when I rotate this red handle on the wrist control, I want the joint to only rotate half as much. So that's going to be the X rotation on this handle, which is going to then drive the X rotation on the joint. So what I'm going to do is look for rotate X just here. So wrist control, rotate X, that's the value that I want there. So I'm going to select this and copy it. Then I'm going to go back down to my forearm joint just here, and I'm going to select the rotate X there. Okay. And what I'm going to do is paste in my wrist control rotation. Then I'm going to select my forearm rotation here and copy it. And I'm going to paste that up the front and then put equals in between. Now I'm going to space these out so you can see this. So I've got my forearm left joint rotation X, okay, which is this rotation X here, equals my left wrist control rotation X, which is this one on here, on this control handle. And what I want to do is make this rotate half as much as this. So what I'm going to do is, it's saying this rotation is equal to whatever this is, divided by 2. Like that. So what I can do then is I can copy this. So I'll just hit Control C. I'm going to create that expression. And if I select my control handle here and I rotate it, you can see that this joint rotates but only half as much. So if I rotate that back and forth, you can see that that's, you know, by the time I've got this hand rotated sort of 90 degrees down, this is only at 45 degrees from where it was. Okay, so that's working okay. So I'm going to do the same thing over on the other side. But this time I don't have to go through the whole cut and paste thing, jumping back and forth between the controls. What I can do is just select the forearm joint. Okay, I'm going to paste the expression in and just change the left to right, because I've been naming all of my stuff correctly and accurately. So yeah, basically just change this right, this left to this right, and this left to right as well, and then hit create. And that should then work in the same way. So if I select the handle and I rotate that round, I can see that that joint is rotating half as much. So that's it. We can then just close this off. Okay, so that's basically all of our arm controls. So we've got leg controls and we've got arm controls. We will need to come back to the feet controls and add in those extra expressions, but we can do that later on down the track. That'll probably be one of the last things we do. So in the next set of videos, we'll start looking at the body controls and sort of what's going up on the spine. So don't forget to save your work, and I'll see you next time.